Welcome to the Community Health Worker Hybrid Certification course. This video discusses conflict resolution skills developed around the state of Texas directives as far as competencies for this topic area. As governed by the state of Texas, the learner-centered competencies we will address are ability to speak up for individuals or communities and withstand intimidation, ability to use language appropriately, and ability to overcome barriers. By the end of this training module, the community health worker will be able to demonstrate the use of language of empowerment, consensus building techniques, and conflict resolution skills. Identify barriers to advocacy, including confidentiality and mandatory reporting. Conflict resolution. Conflict resolution is a way for two or more parties to find a peaceful solution to a disagreement among them. The disagreement may range from personal to financial to political or emotional, or all of the above. A conflict usually involves a dispute between two or more organizations or individuals. Let's review 7 conflict resolution techniques or steps. First, we have understand the conflict. Conflicts arise for a variety of reasons. It is important for you to define clearly your own position and interest in the conflict, and to understand those of your opponent. Think about interests for both parties. What would be some possible outcomes? And is this conflict legitimate? Communicate with the opposition. Now that you have been through your own interests and those of the other party, you can begin to communicate directly with your opposition. Here are some tips for productive talks. First, you have listening. Next, let everyone participate who wants to. Talk about your strong emotions. Don't, however, respond to emotional outbursts. Be an active listener. Speak about yourself, not the other party. Be concrete but flexible. Avoid early judgments. Don't tell the opposition it's up to you to solve your problems. Work to find a solution for everyone. Find a way to make their decision easy. Try to find a way for them to take your position without looking weak. But don't call it a way for them to save face. Egos are important in negotiations. Next, brainstorm possible resolutions. Now that you know what the interests of both parties are and how to better communicate with the opposition, you can start thinking about solutions. Look at all of the interests you have listed for you and your opponents, and look for common interests. Often both parties share many interests. For example, both groups may want stability and public respect. Before you hold a brainstorming meeting, think carefully about how you'll set up the meeting. Write a clear purpose statement for the meeting. Try to use a small group of 5 to 8 people total. Hold the meeting in a different environment from your usual setting. And make sure the setting is an informal one where people feel comfortable and safe. Find an unbiased facilitator, someone who can structure the meeting without sharing his or her own feelings about the conflict. Setting group rules in this step is very important. Next, choosing the best resolution. After the meeting, you will need to decide which resolution is the best. Review your brainstorm ideas. Star the best ideas. These are what you will work with during the conflict resolution process. Set a time to discuss them and determine which idea is the best. The goal here is to use both groups' skills and resources to get the best result for everyone. Which resolution gives both groups the most? That resolution is probably the best one. Next, use a third party. As you brainstorm and choose a good resolution, you may want to use a third-party mediator. This is a person who is not from your group or from the opponent's group, from whom you trust to be fair. Your mediator can help both sides agree upon a standard by which you'll judge your resolution. Standards are a way to measure your agreement. They include expert opinions, law, a way things have been done in the past, and accepted principles. Next, explore alternatives. There may be times when, despite your hard work and goodwill, you cannot find an acceptable resolution to your conflict. You need to think about this possibility before you begin negotiations. At what point will you decide to walk away from a negotiation? What are your alternatives if you cannot reach an agreement with your opponent? It is important that you brainstorm your alternatives to resolution early on in the negotiation process, and that you always have your best alternative somewhere in the back of your mind. As you consider possible agreements with your opponent, compare them to this as the best alternative. If you don't know what the alternative is, you'll be negotiating without all the necessary information. In order to come up with an alternative, start by brainstorming. Then, consider the pros and cons of each alternative. Think about which alternative is realistic and practical. Also, think about how you can make it even better. At the same time, don't forget to put yourself in the shoes of your opposition. What alternatives might they have? Why might they choose them? What can you do to make your choice better than their alternative? Last, we have cope with stressful situations and pressure tactics. So far, we've talked about how to negotiate with a fairly reasonable opponent. However, you need to be prepared to negotiate with all kinds of opponents, both reasonable and unreasonable. What if your opponent is more powerful and influential than you are? What if they refuse to meet or talk with you? All of these situations are stressful and intended to put extra pressure on you to make a quick decision in the opposition's favor. When a situation like this takes place, stay calm and go slowly. Don't get angry or make a rushed decision. Instead, talk about the pressure tactic without judging. Conflicts can arise at any time. How you utilize conflict resolution strategies depend on both your conflict style and your conflict resolution skills. There are many different ways to respond to conflict situations. Some conflict styles involve a considerate or cooperative approach, while others involve either a competitive or passive approach. Those who have had proper conflict resolution training understand how to diffuse a situation and reach an agreement that satisfies all parties. The first step in conflict resolution is understanding the various styles of conflict. The 5 styles of conflict include avoiding, accommodating, compromising, competing, and collaborating. Let's look at the avoiding style. Avoiding or withdrawing from a conflict requires no courage or consideration for the other party. By avoiding the conflict, you are essentially pretending that it never happened or that it doesn't exist. Some examples of avoidance or withdrawal include pretending there's nothing wrong, stonewalling, or completely shutting down. This is a lose-lose situation. Accommodating or giving in. Giving in or accommodating the other party requires a lot of cooperation and little courage. Basically, you agree to accommodate to the other party by acknowledging and accepting his or her point of view or suggestion. This style might be viewed as letting the other party have his or her way. While this style can lead to making peace and moving forward, it can also lead to the accommodator feeling resentment towards the other party. It's putting aside one's own concern in order to satisfy the concerns of the other party. This is an I lose, you win situation. Compromising. Compromising is a big step towards conflict resolution. Both courage and consideration are used when both parties look for a common ground. You agree to negotiate larger points and let go of the smaller points. This style expedites the resolution process. Occasionally, the person compromising might use passive-aggressive tactics to mislead the other party, so beware. This style seeks to partially satisfy all parties. It results in the middle ground outcome. Competing or standing your ground. While standing your ground requires courage, it can also be inconsiderate. By standing your ground, you are essentially competing with the other party. You'll do anything to ensure that you win the battle. The fact is, a competing approach offers short-term rewards, but in the long term, effects can be detrimental to your win. Competing is to seeking to win your position at the expense of the other party's losing his or hers. It's the I win, you lose situation. Collaborating. Collaboration plays a major role within conflict resolution and requires a great courage and much consideration. Collaborating with the other party involves listening to their side, discussing areas of agreement and goals, and ensuring that all parties understand each other. It's seeking a mutually satisfying outcome for all parties. Collaboration requires thinking creatively to resolve the problem without concessions. Collaborators are usually admired and well respected. This is your ideal win-win situation. Dealing with difficult people. Here are some techniques to deal with difficult people. Blending. Blending allows to reduce differences. It's listening to understand and finding things in common, and it shows you understand. It allows you to play back, clarify, summarize, and confirm. Next is redirect. You use redirect to build rapport. It allows you to listen to identify positive and real intent, identify criteria that is valued, helps you state your positive intent, and appreciate criticism. Listening to understand. I find that whenever a difficult person confronts me, I automatically tense up and mentally consider my defense. When I am calm and open-minded, I know that I will never have to defend myself ever. The most effective way to diffuse a difficult person is to listen, truly listen to what they are trying to say, which means keeping my mouth closed and hearing them all the way through. Whether or not I agree with them is irrelevant, and I certainly do not let them know what I'm thinking. I can listen and get back to them if necessary, such as with a spouse, coworker, or friend. I find the following responses to be the most effective. Let me get back to you on that. You could be right. When a person is being difficult, it is because they are responding to their perceived reality rather than what's going on in the moment. Oftentimes, their frustration has little to do with us or with you and I. Next, we have identifying with positive intent. Positive intent means assuming that people have good reasons for saying and doing what they do. The opposite of positive intent is assuming that people have negative intentions behind their actions. Identifying with high-value criteria. The next step to take is when conflict emerges, is to go beyond people's stated positions to identify underlying interests or objectives. These are called highly valued criteria. They are the reasons why people desire specific outcomes. Speaking to be understood. As much as listening is important, speaking effectively is as crucial. You need to speak in a way to be understood. How to deal with difficult people teaches you to listen actively and speak effectively. Once you develop such crucial skills as a communication habit, you will be able to take over the difficult situations and thus get difficult people with difficult behaviors under your control. Mandatory reporting in Texas. This is the legislative requirement imposed on selected classes of people to report suspected cases of child abuse and neglect to government authorities. This applies to children, dependent adults, elderly, disabled, and all members of society. Mandatory reporting in Texas outlines professionals' requirement to report, the reporting to other persons, institutional responsibilities to report, standards for making a report, privileged communications, inclusion of a reporter's name in a report, and disclosure of reporter identity. I encourage you to look into the mandatory reporting for Texas. Let's take a look at some mandatory reporting examples. First, we have Cindy, a community health worker who does home visits for an adult diabetic patient who is cognitively delayed and is bedbound. The adult patient is unable to get from his bed to his wheelchair without assistance. Cindy notices that there is a 1-year-old baby in the home at the time of one of her visits. There are no other adults in the home. The community health worker notices dirty diapers on the floor and the patient's prescription pain medications on the floor beside his bed. The patient states that the 1-year-old is his grandchild and he is babysitting a couple days a week for his daughter while she is at work. The community health worker tells her team social worker to make a report to CPS. Let's think about this situation. In this situation, it requires a community health worker to make a report to CPS and APS. That includes Child Protective Services and Adult Protective Services. The unsecured narcotic pain medications are a danger to the 1-year-old who can easily gain access to the medications. Also, because the patient is unable to get out of bed, he is unable to adequately supervise a child of that age and respond to the child's needs in case of an emergency. Lastly, the APS report is necessary because the patient is unable to get out of his home in case of a fire. The state requires that any professional who suspects abuse or neglect must make a report. Since the community health worker saw the situation firsthand, She is most appropriate individual to make the report. Here's the next scenario. A community health worker has a patient who is hospitalized for 2 weeks. The doctor knows the patient has a 16-year-old grandson who lives with him. The grandson comes by the clinic to collect health education materials for his grandfather. The community health worker realizes the grandson is living alone during this 2-week period. Now, the situation requires more investigation before a report will be appropriate. A 16-year-old child is generally self-sufficient enough to be allowed to stay alone in their home overnight and care for themselves. Unless other information is gathered suggesting that the child does not have appropriate food, shelter, safety, or has a disability that would impede the child from caring for themselves, a CPS report will not be appropriate. Here are a few topics to add to your advocacy toolbox. Conflict resolution, dealing with difficult people. Community health workers can develop the skills to advocate for their clients, patients, and community, and mandatory reporting. By the end of this training module, the community health worker will be able to demonstrate the use of language of empowerment, consensus building techniques, and conflict resolution skills. Identify barriers to advocacy, including confidentiality and mandatory reporting. As governed by the state of Texas, the learner-centered competencies we will address are ability to speak up for individuals or communities and withstand intimidation, ability to use language appropriately, and ability to overcome barriers.